council is that this past budget year was kind of a new experience for a lot of us here in Roswell, me included. One of the things that came up over the course of the last budget cycle was taking a look at our base budget and where we're putting our dollars and what our philosophy is and how we spend those dollars. So we thought it would be beneficial to bring in the Grand Clerk Master of priority-based budgeting, come and talk to us about how this process works, how it works for Roswell, how we use it, and what the future priority-based budgeting is for us here in the city. Chris Fabian is here from Resource X, and I think this evolution will take maybe 3 hours. We're hoping it's a very collaborative session, so I'll turn it over to Chris to run the program. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you all, council members. Thanks everybody who's in attendance today. My name is Chris Fabian, and I am here to talk about priority-based budgeting. I don't know if it will be as rousing as the halftime show, Super Bowl, but we'll do our best in some PBB world here.
Depends on who you ask. Depends on who you ask.
I have.
I did.
All right, this will be a great afternoon.
I knew that was coming.
Okay, thank you. I have a pretty simple agenda today. We're going to break up the day over the course of the next 3 hours into each of these 3 sections overall. First and foremost, I want to take some time to go through what you've already accomplished in priority-based budgeting and basically how it works. What's the logic behind the methodology itself, with some specific information about your implementation. Secondly, we'll take a break after that first section. Secondly, we'll get into how organizations begin to take action on the data. It's almost like, so what? Once you accomplish priority-based budgeting and you have built this data set, what do you actually do with it? How are your departments starting to think about their information and use it in budget recommendations overall, or how can you use it as a tool? And then third, finally, I'd like to talk about the evolution of priority-based budgeting as a practice. It's come a long way since we began, and you were among the first organizations who actually implemented priority-based budgeting, and we've learned from you, and we've learned from approximately the 200 plus organizations across North America who have implemented, to see how they're headed in different aspirational directions with their priority-based budgeting information. I'm going to start with a little intro on myself, and then if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to make sure that I have all of your names here in just a second, and some of your interest level in PBB to make sure we hit it today. But when I got started in this work, are any of you familiar with the work of David Osborne and Peter Hutchinson? They wrote a book called Reinventing Government quite a while ago, and then they followed up that book with another one called The Price of Government. I bet you would. You're familiar. Is it?
I'm not going to raise my hand.
Okay, fair enough. That's next on your list? Yeah. All right, you got it for Christmas. Oh, you missed that one. I mean, it was a New York Times bestseller on government budgeting, which is pretty cool as far as government budgeting books go. I came from the world of engineering, actually, and when I started to work in local governments from a management consulting perspective, later doing rate studies and rate design, fleet analysis and facility analysis, our objective was always, how can we save an organization money operationally? And what became really interesting was, for any project that we worked on, say we worked in Laramie, Wyoming, which we did, and saved $500,000 on fleet, the interesting question was, what becomes of that money? Does it go to another program? Does it get absorbed in the miscellaneous line item in the budget? Does it get refunded to taxpayers? Like what happens to that savings overall? And so while that was kind of interesting to me, at the same time, here's Osborne and Hutchinson, these authors I was mentioning. They had written this book called The Price of Government. And they were on a similar path, but from a different angle. And they were looking at our traditional line item budget. And they were practitioners in local government. And as they were answering to their own elected officials, the question would oftentimes come up, how do we know if we increase a particular line item in the budget,
if we're actually creating a better community out there. So their idea was, we always have to do the line item budget, but how could we come up with a different method to actually understand the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish? I had a chance to work with their firm back in some of the original implementations of this budgeting for outcomes exercise. City of Fort Collins, Colorado was one of the first. Snohomish County, Washington was one of the first. If you've heard of any of these stories before, to try outcome-based budgeting was their idea. And while the objective was great, how can we understand from the budget, what are we getting for it? Their implementation methods were not quite there yet. For example, when we worked in Fort Collins, the idea was this group would come on site and say, hey, staff, everybody, we have this great new thing. It's going to be a transition away from our traditional line item budgeting that you're used to. And people were kind of more or less interested in what new direction they might be heading. Said the good news, we're going to do something innovative. We won't have to talk about line item increases. We're going to talk more about outcomes. Maybe the bad news is you're kind of all laid off. But good news again, you can bid back for your jobs. And so it was a extremely chaotic type of implementation methodology overall. Their theory was if everyone could repackage what it is they do and try to bid it towards outcome areas, and the outcome buyers of the organization would act like a purchasing department and try to buy services to achieve outcomes, that they could achieve what they were intending to do. But we wanted to build on that and create a different type of methodology that would achieve the same outcomes overall. So that's what we've been doing since the invention of priority-based budgeting. This was my line item budget when I was a local government practitioner. And similar to the stories of Osborne and Hutchinson, when my elected officials would look at this every year, our line item budget, and see for any particular line item, repair and maintenance, uniform contracts. Anybody have a favorite line item in the budget? My commissioners was gas, oil, and lube. What is it that goes into that particular line item? What about the miscellaneous category? What's in miscellaneous? Here's our personnel line item in the budget. Fantastic. The majority of our budget is personnel. And their question to me was, whether we cut the budget or increase the budget, how do we know, are we getting any safer for what we do? Are we improving the health and well-being of our citizens? Are we improving the local economy? Like, how can we equate any decision at the line item level with the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish? Again, let me be clear. We have to do line item budgeting, at least most of us in the United States. This is our best practice for understanding where money actually gets spent, and to actually do the accounting side to measure if we actually spent towards those line items overall. But to answer these questions, the feeling was we needed a different tool. And so what we set out to do was create something that would help us, in fact, measure spending, the contribution from our budget towards the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. So this is illustrative. This is not you yet. This is just what we tried to do with PBB, something that would help us understand of all the dollars that go into your budget, what contributes to a safe and secure community, what makes us healthier, what contributes to a strong and diverse local economy overall. Another one of our objectives was, how could we use this tool to prioritize spending? Perhaps there's resources going to programs that have more to do with what we're trying to accomplish versus resources that go to programs that have less to do. So I'll explain what this is all about, but we came up with a 4-quartile tier. You could have come up with 10 quartiles or 10 tiers overall. You could have just said high priority versus low priority. We came up with 4 levels of priority overall to help us understand better the resources that go towards accomplishing results to the highest degree. Would be quartile 1, as differentiated from quartile 2, which are programs that also have a high degree of influence on the results you're trying to accomplish, as differentiated from quartile 3 and ultimately quartile 4, where you all or departments could question if given the opportunity to reallocate resources, might we look at areas where they have less to do with accomplishing results. And then finally, if measuring the investment towards results was one goal, the second was being able to prioritize resources. The third was to actually use this in the budget process to make recommendations around where you would actually reallocate resources. So if you had X amount of dollars in quartile 4 one year, And the following year, you wanted to take some of those resources and push them towards new programs that you want to start in quartile 1, or enhancing current services that need improvement or bolstering that are of a higher priority, that this would be a nice framework to use as departments make their recommendations overall. So those are the goals of our priority-based budgeting creation. And like I mentioned, we have now implemented PBB in just over 200 organizations throughout North America, the United States, and Canada. And here locally, along with you, the city of Chambly is an implementer, East Point's an implementer, and then in the neighboring state of South Carolina, Columbia, and Charleston, just a couple in your neighborhood overall. Since 2008, when we created it, the International City County Management Association and the Government Finance Officers Association have been keeping track of the work and just seeing how it actually plays out in various communities. ICMA is the organization that credentials city managers in the US and internationally. GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association and is responsible for professional education and training for finance officials across the country as well. And they've declared best practice based on 3 basic criteria. 1, a repeatable methodology that any organization who goes through this could follow the exact same steps with some flexibility and achieve the same outcomes as any other. Second was scalability, that it works for large organizations, mid-sized organizations, and small. Our largest who's ever gone through this is San Jose, California. Edmonton, Alberta, Canada is about the same size, almost 1 million people. And our smallest is Victor, Colorado. Anybody ever heard of Victor, Colorado? No. Sometimes there are people, and they have a very strange story. That's why it's always a nice interlude. But it's a population of about 200 people overall. And then anywhere in between. And then finally, that there's some sort of measurable outcome, that things can actually change, that you can see resources being reallocated over time. And it's not just good in theory, but you can measure how well you're doing overall. So that's how we achieve the best practice designation. Before I get into your specific implementation, that was my introduction and how I got into all this work. If you wouldn't mind, maybe we can go next to Gary and just kind of go through the rest of quick introductions and maybe a word about your interest level in priority-based budgeting and what you're hoping to learn today.
I'm Dave Davidson, I'm the city attorney, so this is going to affect my budget. Whatever they decide, so I'm very interested.
Very good motivation.
My name's Lori Henry, and I'm the mayor, and I present the budget, and I want to make sure that it's a good budget.
Also good motivation.
Good morning, I'm Mike Palermo, city council member. I'd say for me, what I'm most curious to hear about is regarding the underlying budget. So I'd say in our current or process we've had for the last 3 years, really the items that get the most analysis are new requests. They want a new $10,000 for this new thing, but I'd like to better understand suggestions, best practices in analysis of the existing underlying budget. So that's what I want to learn about and discuss. But also just to warn you, fortunately I have a emergency dentist appointment that I scheduled this morning, so I have to leave in about probably an hour and a half.
Come on.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Come on.
That's why I gave my sandwich.
I want a letter.
Yeah.
The head. Thank you for the forewarning. Sounds
Yeah.
like quartile 1.
I'm gonna call Tizer if I need anesthesia, if I need him to pick me up, so he can leave a little early.
I'm Sean Grower, city council member, liaison to transportation. I suddenly have come down with some dental pain.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No, it's interesting. I think I'd like to echo what Mike said, which was that one of the things I struggled with last year was just assuming everything else is fine, right? And then kind of changing, adding and deleting things here and there, but not understanding as well as I would like to this year what goes on, what does the base budget look like and how does it kind of affect our decision making?
Marie Wilsey, city council member. I was really interested about what you just said about being able to measure the investment and results and how are we making the community healthier, safer, and improving the economy. So just like to learn a little bit more about how we can measure our expenses against those priorities.
Great, thanks.
Matt Judy, City Council Member. Anything and everything on that you teach me is be helpful because it's pretty complex, and I think that more you can learn about it.
I'm Matt Tyser, also City Council member. I'm interested when you get to questions on some questions I have on your quartile 1 through 3 and how that gets put into practice.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, Marcelo Zapata, Roswell City Council, and well, interested to know, more in detail, and how can we make this more transparent, more open, and more easy to understand to the regular citizen of Roswell.
All right. Well, thank you for letting me know a little bit about you. In this first section, this is the easiest part. We're just going to walk through how the priority-based budgeting data gets built, so that it's a very logical flow. But please stop me along the way for things that you'd like to learn, because oftentimes this is so easy to breeze past, but it's the foundation upon which all of the rest of the data gets built and used in decision making overall. So the basic flow, what I'm demonstrating in this diagram, is that first we start with what we call a program inventory, a list of the services you provide. What is it that the city does? The second step is program costing. So once you know what you do, the goal is to take your budget, that line item budget, and somehow translate it around the services. So you can say, here's what we do, and here's how much it costs us to do what we do. At a budget level, it's a planning tool overall. And so we can have an order of magnitude of what it costs us to provide any particular service overall. Third is this evaluation of program. We call it program scoring. And the idea in that stage is for all of the outcomes we're trying to achieve, safer community, healthier people, and so on, it's actually an evaluation of each and every program in terms of their overall contribution to those results. I'll get into a little bit more detail on the difference between departments went through a self-assessment for scoring programs, and that's followed up by a peer review step to bring in some quality control overall. And it's not just results alone. There are additional categories that make certain programs important to provide to your citizens overall. Maybe they're mandated, and that might not have anything to do with the results you're trying to achieve. And so the evaluation criteria tries to take all of that into account overall. And then finally, all of this information comes together in that ranking for prioritization to help departments make a persuasive case for budget recommendations that they have overall. So here's the process. I'm going to go through it in a little bit more detail. Over on the right-hand side, this is the online portal that departments use to actually enter in their data from one year to the next and keep it going. But let's talk program inventory first. Any quick guesses, or anybody who has experience, how many programs have been identified, individual services offered to citizens or services offered internally to help support the organization from within? Just a guess. Maybe you know the answer. Maybe you know the total number of programs in your inventory, and you're scared to say it. You impress your friends. How much?
130.
130. All right, we have 130 and 130 on the table. Council member?
I'm going a number bigger than 150.
You're going a number bigger than, oh man, interesting. He's using some sort of logic, the number of pages and programs on the page. Fascinating approach. How about anybody on this side of the room? No guesses. That's okay.
221.
221. Man, that's okay. All right. You just won yourself a free cup of coffee in the back. It's actually unlimited for the day. But you are very close. You're the closest of any guess so far. Ryan, Harpreet, any guesses from your end?
Don't get it wrong.
Yeah.
330, says Ryan?
300.
Yeah. Harpreet?
I think it's around 225.
344. Gary has the correct answer. And he nailed it right on the money. You have 344 specific program entries. As Ryan and Harpreet we're talking a little bit lower than that number. Sometimes a program gets split up across departments, and so it adds to the total number of service offerings. If you think about it, from where you come from in your various careers or your experience as you have tried to look at the budget for the city of Roswell, the idea that you have over 300 lines of business, 300 offerings that you have to manage and figure out what it costs you to deliver each, and which one needs more money and which one might need less overall. I want you to kind of realize the awe of a business that is responsible for 300 and then some programs or services out to the community overall. It's an immense undertaking of what you do, and I'm sure this is not lost on you. But it's always something that we appreciate in our work in local government. There are so many different things that you are responsible for providing. Here is an example. If you look at program names, everything from animal control services to producing the annual audit, to aquatics management, athletic field maintenance, alcohol licensing, producing the annual operating budget. This is overall across citywide programs that we're looking at. Here I've drilled down specifically into the finance department, and you see there's the annual audit, again, budget analysis and forecasting, budget monitoring and reporting, contract administration, court fines and bonds. These things take human resources to deliver. They take non-personnel costs in the budget to help support for your materials, and over 300 and then some programs overall. So staff identified all of the services that you provide and down to that specific program level in that very first step for program inventory. The second step then was to take each of those specific programs and try to allocate the budget to understand what does it cost us to deliver the annual audit, what does it cost us to deliver the budget monitoring and compliance process overall. And it was across all of your accounting funds. I wanted you to appreciate that. Sometimes so much focus, and rightfully so, is placed on how the general fund is doing or how some special operating funds are doing overall, but it's across all of the operation. Your entire budget was allocated to those programs, and you can actually drill down to be able to see, this is a work in progress as the 2019 data comes to be loaded completely, but we can see at an accounting fund level how those funds might switch from one year to the next, a 2018 budget to a 2019 budget. We could drill down from that accounting fund level to also look at any specific department. And this is probably what you're more used to from one year to the next in the budget, is my guess, but I might be wrong, is that you probably have this intelligence where you can see how one department's budget changed from a really big picture perspective from one year to the next. Did they stay flat? Did they go down? Did they actually increase? But our goal overall was to drill down one step further and say, at a programmatic level, how did the budget change? Or at a programmatic level, how much does it cost us to do one program or another? Here's utility billing, all the way to P-card administration, fixed asset management, general billing and grant compliance overall, 300 and then some programs that you provide. I'm going to show you a tool in just one second that will demonstrate how you might, the council member here who just had to leave, maybe some dental work, he was talking about openness and transparency. I want to show you how we've actually built a tool to bring along today to have you click around and see various programs that might be interesting to you from a cost perspective and also from an alignment with results perspective, which I'll get to momentarily. You might be wondering, well, how did they allocate these costs to the programs? So just a quick word on that, and you can dive more deeply into some of these questions, but if you think about it, we have personnel costs in the budget, our human resources, and then we have everything that's not related to a human resource, which we characterize as non-personnel costs in the budget overall.
people were allocated to programs based on an estimate, a projection of how much time they spend supporting each program overall. So when I first went through this in my local government work, I had to say, of the programs that I participate in and support, approximately how much of my time in a given year, 10%, 20%, 50%, goes to one program versus another. And departments and their staff did the exact same thing with the help of Harpreet and Ryan and Gary and your whole team. It was not a small undertaking for departments to be able to understand how much their programs cost overall. And it becomes really interesting as you continue this work from one year to the next and move it into the future to simply get better at trying to understand where your time goes from a staff perspective overall and how you might have options and choices to reallocate that time. And similarly from a non-personnel perspective. So you take a non-personnel line item like uniforms, and the idea was not just focusing on the dollar amount for uniforms, but to ask the question, why do we have to spend money on uniforms? What program do they support? We see some uniformed officials here in the room, and they provide a program where the uniforms are obviously very much needed. So to align those non-personnel line items with the programs that they support gives us more intelligence on why the line item budget is what it is. Does that make sense to everybody? Allocation of personnel, allocation of non-personnel to the programs, and now we understand how much programs cost. There's also a revenue allocation. So when it comes to certain programs that charge a fee for the use of that particular service, it becomes really interesting to see how does that fee, the total amount, compare to the total cost of providing that program as you've calculated it. We'll get into that in how to take action on the data, how to really focus on cost recovery as well. But from a cost perspective, people costs, non-personnel costs were allocated to programs, and then revenues were allocated to programs so you can see if you're recovering your costs for any service that you provide across the entire city. So now we've covered what do we do and how much does it cost. The third component was measuring the influence of programs on results. There's a scoring step, and your results are what you see up here towards the top. The idea behind a result is answering the question, why are you in business as a local government? Why does the city of Roswell exist? And your result areas included economic development and vitality. You believe that you use city resources to fund programs to help make the local economy better. A safe and secure environment overall, safe and secure community. You believe that you exist to achieve a sustainable infrastructure and community resources, and each of these have specific definitions, which I'll also address. Access to cultural, historical, recreational, and leisure opportunities, and well-designed, livable community with strong neighborhoods. These make up the types of results that you're trying to accomplish. These look very similar to some of our cities overall. Again, as we work with over 200 cities across the country, we really start to see why do they believe that city government exists overall. And while your results don't mimic exactly what others have said before, they fall in line with what is a traditional reason for local government. You see on the very right-hand side, there's a result called good governance. And that was important because while you have programs that serve citizens directly, which we call community-facing or community-oriented programs, you also have programs that serve the organization internally, and we make a distinction. We call those governance programs. So in scoring, community-facing programs were scored against their own set of evaluation criteria, the criteria that make programs relevant to your citizens overall, whereas internally, in terms of good governance, your internal functions were not necessarily scored against community-oriented results. Governance programs were scored against internal results of governance. Let me give you some examples. So a community-facing program might be street maintenance. That's something that the citizens engage in. A community-facing program might be police patrol or animal control. A community-facing program might be athletic fields maintenance, things that the citizens use. And you're offering these programs directly to your community. A governance program, on the other hand, might be something like payroll processing. So you do payroll internally for the benefit of the organization, and you don't take payroll processing, which serves your employees internally, and try to understand if we increase payroll processing, do we get safer? You don't provide payroll as a community-facing program, so it's inappropriate to, or it's very hard to think about the answer to a question like that. So instead, payroll gets scored against the internal results of governance, which include things like, are we good stewards of our financial and human resources and our physical assets? Are we advising our elected officials and city manager and department heads with good data and transparent information? Are we maintaining our regulatory compliance? Those are examples of internal governance results overall, against which those internal functions from IT, HR primarily, fleet, facilities, some in the city manager's office, some in finance, budget, those internal programs get scored against governance. Does that make sense to everybody? Just that distinction, community versus governance overall? Great.
Chris, a quick question on the
Yeah.
the tabs you have up there.
Yeah.
Are these the values that were identified through the first PBB process, or these goals? Where did those come from?
Ryan, I might lean on you a little bit to see if they've actually, we did do a result setting in the very first rollout of PBB to establish results and definitions. I'd love to have some perspective on how that's migrated over the years.
Well, really that was the first step in the process when we went through this back in 2014. Chris was here and met with the mayor and council and had taken some preliminary data that was available on our website, some strategic goals that had been identified in the past, and tried to bring that together and did an exercise with the mayor and council to make sure that basically what could we all come to a consensus on in terms of what were the big picture goals for the city. So there was an exercise in the beginning to identify what these were. I think that was pretty much it. So.
Yeah. So when we do the strategic plan coming up, we'll identify those goals. So this may change, may stay the same. But once we identify that, that's when we plug in to the PBB platform to base our programs on. Is that accurate?
It could be 100% accurate. All that we would advise you is sometimes in a strategic planning exercise, what you come up with might be what is really in focus, what needs attention, what needs improvement from a strategic planning perspective. And the overall goal of your results is to make sure that they answer the question completely, why are you in business, even if an area doesn't need improvement. You won't know that until you finish your strategic plan. I believe the spirit of your question is, once you go through the strategic planning exercise, will they inform these results? Could things change? Absolutely. Yeah, very much. Totally target. That happens. What we tend to see is, from a big picture perspective, while you might always be in the business of achieving a safe and secure community for your citizens, the issues change. So in your strategic planning exercise, when it comes to how you define a safe and secure community overall, that might need iterating over time. And certainly the programs that you propose to make Roswell safer, those programs, how you provide them in the future might look different than how you've done them in the past overall. So there's multiple areas where your strategic planning work is going to influence all of this for you. Sure. In addition to result areas, I've got this area for basic program attributes. One of the shortcomings of the budgeting for outcomes work that I was originally taught from was that it was only focused on outcome areas. And so what was an unexpected outcome of that work is you would have programs that fell to the bottom of their prioritization, their differentiation, and from a department perspective, they'd say, well, I don't understand. We have to provide that program. The state government requires us to do it. Or council adopted policy in the past that requires us to provide a particular program. So this whole issue of mandate was something we needed to introduce to the evaluation process as well. How mandated is a program? And I think you'll find it fascinating. We had a sliding scale. It's really interesting. I will spend some time on the detail of degree of mandate scoring scale, but I won't do it for all the rest of them. Just bear with me. So it's a 0 to 4 scoring scale. A 4 for degree of mandate meant that a department provides the program because it's federally mandated or mandated by state government, so that's the highest level of mandate. A 3 was it's not mandated by the federal government or the state government, but it's something in your charter or incorporation documents. So you probably have to go to the people to change it. So that's a very strong degree of mandate. It's just not federal or state. A 2 was also none of the above. So it's not in your charter, not in incorporation documents, not federally or state mandated, but you've passed some sort of local code. It's in your code. You've enacted policy around it, so it's a self-imposed mandate. You could change it as council. That was a 2. A 1 is none of the above, but it's an industry standard. So sometimes you pave roads a certain way because the American Society of Civil Engineers says this is the best way to maintain a road asset to the best of our knowledge, and it's industry standard to do it this way for the lowest total cost of ownership. So that's a 1. That's a degree of mandate. And then a 0 is absolutely none of the above. So every service you provide is tagged with that information. Is it a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4? So as elected officials, if you're ever wondering, what is it that we do that's truly required by the federal government or state government, you can query that in your data and say, I just want to see the programs that scored 4 in mandate. Or if you wanted to say, I'm not interested in that, I want to find out every program that we do that is not required by the federal government. It's not in our charter, that no council before us nor this council has ever adopted policy on. It's not a best practice. It scored mandate 0. Do we have any of those? And you can query on those programs overall. So quite fascinating. For any of these scoring criteria, what I hope to teach you is that you can ask those questions. You can ask them to Gary and Ryan and Harpreet in the departments. If you're in a council meeting and there's a particular service up for discussion and you want to know, I'm curious if that program is mandated or not. You have the data, so long as you've identified that program in your program inventory overall. If you want to know how the program scored against any particular result, you have that data as well. The remainder of these basic program attributes, degree of mandate was one of these global categories. Another was degree of reliance upon you, the city, as a service provider. So you also have it in your data. Departments were tasked with answering the question, for a service they provide, do citizens rely on us to receive the benefit of that service? Or are there other potential partners out there? Partners in the public sector, partners in nonprofit, partners in the private sector, where reasonably citizens could turn to. So degree of reliance also had a 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 scoring scale in terms of what that meant. Degree of cost recovery, you have some programs that are entirely subsidized. You have some by general government resources. You have some programs that pay for themselves from a user fee perspective or from a grant. And you have programs in the middle that receive some sort of subsidization and have some percentage less than 100% of cost recovery overall. That's really fascinating to study. Size of population served and change in demand round out all of the scoring criteria. Does that make sense? Okay. It's a pretty robust evaluation of programs based on how they achieve what you hope they achieve, the results that you're looking for, in addition to all of the other reasons you might provide the program. Maybe we're mandated, maybe they pay for themselves, maybe they serve everybody, maybe demand is surging for this particular program. But we take it all into consideration, or you took it all into consideration. Departments went through a self-assessment where departments self-scored their programs, and that was followed up by a peer review quality control step to try to make sure that we're getting as close to the truth as we know about program influence on results and the way that programs meet these basic program attribute categories overall. There is a tool that I will toggle out of these slides here in just a second and show you how it works. But the idea is that for any of your results, here I've clicked on economic development and vitality, you can see specifically how it's defined. So it's not this kind of large nebulous idea of what does economic development mean, but specifically what were the criteria that departments used as they were trying to tell you or communicate in scoring how influential that program is to that particular result. And we can click through any of those result areas. And with any of these results highlighted, to your original question about influence of programs on results, we can begin to see within every department the programs that are the darkest for any result that we've clicked on. Here the color is for economic development and vitality. These are the programs that appear to have the highest degree of influence. So the darker the color, the greater the influence, and the larger the box the greater the spending. I'll pop this up here in just a second so we can actually play around with that data. And for any program here, I've highlighted community development, building permitting. If you wanted to drill down even further to understand how that program is funded, here's an interesting program where the personnel costs are 1.8% of approximately $800,000 program, and the non-personnel costs are $840,000 of $850,000. My guess is that's probably a contracted program overall. Good. All right. It could have been a wrong guess. So program alignment, program influence on results. What do we do? How much does it cost? Why do we do it? We've answered these 3 questions. Those are the 3 fundamental questions of PBB. And all of this comes together. Remember, this is one of our major areas. We wanted to know the influence, the allocation of resources towards the achievement of these particular result areas. The second was differentiation of spending. And so you also have your current understanding of how resources were allocated to programs and programs scored against results. So your 4 quartile alignment is what you see here. And again, we can get into this in further detail as we go today. But I think you should know this is a very healthy spending array. So we're 200 communities in, and we work with communities oftentimes over the course of many years. And just intuitively, you want to see more of your resources going towards quartile 1 and quartile 2. Those are the programs that have the highest degree of influence on results. They meet the scoring criteria. They're most aligned with your evaluation criteria. But we have to differentiate. And so you have quartile 3 and quartile 4 allocations as well. And all it is, it's a relative differentiation. But again, in terms of the overall health, if it were flip-flopped and the vast majority of your spending was in quartile 3 and quartile 4, my speech today would be, you have a lot of opportunity to talk about. And oftentimes, especially in county government, where the scope of their work has really grown over time, they tend to have far more pronounced quartile 3, some quartile 4 overall. And those are very healthy discussions for counties to get into as well. It just so happens that your spending array is nicely aligned. Now, it also shows you have $7.4 million in quartile 4. What does that mean? Does that mean, fantastic, we can just reallocate $7.4 million tomorrow? No. Does it mean departments might have some recommendations, some ideas that if you wanted to start a new program overall and you're looking for the resources to try to fund it, is this an area where you might look first to at least ask the question, what would the trade-off look like? So you can have a healthy policy discussion overall. That's the direction we try to point you in. And we'll get into that in taking action on the data. You can drill into this as well and ask, as I'm sure you're wondering, what is in quartile 1? And we can see the spending from a department perspective of all of their programs that landed in quartile 1. Departments have programs that ended up in quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, and quartile 4. So each department has their own specific spending array. Here I've highlighted environmental public works, and if we click into that particular department, we can see all of the programs that they're offering that had the highest degree of influence on the evaluation criteria. So again, reflecting, if I'm in your shoes, I might be sitting back going, wow, that's really fascinating. I would love to see what do we offer that has the highest degree of influence on the results we're trying to achieve, what departments are represented, what programs are offered, and to be able to see the spend on those various programs. One thing that might be fascinating to you, you could have a program that costs a lot and it's in quartile 1, or you can have a program that costs hardly anything at all, and it also ends up in quartile 1. Why is that? The expenditure on a program has nothing to do with its relevance. The program was scored based on how influential it is on results and basic program attributes overall. So you have a very expensive program. You have a very expensive program in quartile 4. It means you're spending a lot on something that has less to do with achieving your evaluation criteria. But as you drill into it, you can see how much everything costs overall. Before I get into this next section, I wanted to toggle out of these slides really quickly. I did want to show you that tool that we were just messing around with. And if I go to your portal, and click here on your present website, I will test your internet speed and watch the loading of your present website. We can zoom in a little bit here so you can have some fun here. So this is kind of neat. What we're trying to demonstrate is back to that influence of programs on results that a couple of you were asking about in the very beginning. And so in my slides, I highlighted economic development and vitality. But if we wanted to go to safe and secure environment, you can see how that particular result area is defined. Again, where were these definitions used? As departments scored programs, it wasn't up to a department to imagine what a safe and secure environment actually means. They used the result definitions to make their case. If I were to try to persuade you that my program makes it safer, I would use any number of these particular definitions or all of them, and the more more definitions I could use in general, the more influential that program is overall on a result. We could look at sustainable infrastructure, community resources, and so on and so forth. And if I scroll down for any particular result area, again, the darker the program, the more related that program appears to be for the result we've highlighted above. If I was in safe and secure community, you offer a lot of things that make Roswell a safer place. So we've heard from elected officials who have town hall meetings, or administration that has town hall meetings, or coffee with the mayor, the types of interactive discussions that you might have with a citizen overall. And when the question comes up, what are you doing to make us safe? What are you doing about jobs and economic development and vitality here? The idea of this particular portal was to be able to say, well, here's what we're doing. These are the programs that we provide that have the highest degree of influence on this result, economic vitality, economic development and vitality. What are we doing about making Roswell a more well-designed, livable community, and with strong neighborhoods? You're doing a lot. That's the visual impact of all of these programs overall. And if you wanted to see specifically any particular program to dig into it, again, the larger the box, the larger the budget. You can absolutely do that. And it's pretty fun to just explore, again, of the 300 and then some programs that you do. This is kind of a summary, a way to bring it all together to say, here are the programs we provide, here's how much they cost, and here's how they influence the results overall. So far, so good? All right.
A quick question. How are I guess the allocations of priorities or the ranking, how is that determined? I mean, it seemed like some of them could be a little subjective, so I'm just wondering if there's like a matrix or something that everyone has to use.
Yeah, that's a good detailing question. I like it. So in order to get to quartile 1 versus quartile 2, quartile 3 and quartile 4, each program, let me try to make this a little bit more easy to read, and I'll try to just, I'm going right into your portal here, and I was going to look at scoring by program. I was interested if I could pull a specific program and show you an example of a scorecard, actually. Let's do one for, let's just look at safety. This is from the perspective of results. But as I'm scrolling through here, accident analysis, building, permitting, the acronym CALEA, city-initiated community events, these programs were all scored against the safety result to a degree of 4, which from the scoring scale was the highest possible influence on that particular result area. So departments went through a self-assessment first where they rated their own programs for each and every one of your categories. These are shorthand for what those results actually are. It might be easier to explain here. Every program was scored against economic development and vitality. Every program was scored against safe and secure community, and so on and so forth. And they were also scored against those basic program attributes, degree of mandate, cost recovery, population served, and so on. In order for a program to be quartile 1, there were a host of programs. I can actually show you all of them here. I'll open up your result alignment. Quartile 1 simply meant the programs that scored the highest cumulatively compared to everything else that you provide, as differentiated from Quartile 2 programs, which were the next batch of highest scoring programs, as differentiated from Quartile 3 and ultimately Quartile 4. So if I'm doing a decent job of explaining this, the Quartile 1 and Quartile 2 programs, no one placed a program in Quartile 1 or Quartile 2. It was an outcome of how that program scored against all the other categories. In the early days of other approaches to outcome budgeting or prioritization, it was a typical thing to do for a city administrator to go to the departments and say, please tell me what are the really important things that you do, and then also give me the list of the things that you do that aren't important. And you probably guessed it how that worked out. But, yeah, no one would ever put, unless there was a program they're trying to communicate about that is really not that important and they want to talk about it, hardly anybody would actually choose like Quartile 4 in our language. So instead, we back into priority ranking as an outcome of how the program achieves all of those evaluation criteria. Is that helpful? Or do you want me to go even further?
No, that's fine. So it's done by the departments themselves, or department heads, and they're definitely basically just like
the departments went through a self-assessment to score each program against every criteria, and then there was a peer review step. And in peer review, there were teams designed around you. You might have a keep me on track. I'm talking about how it actually works in our teachings, but make sure that this is how it played out here. For each result area, say community, economic development, there were cross-departmental teams, not including that department to the greatest extent possible to minimize conflict of interest, who were able to ask that department questions. Why did you score your program so highly in our result? We don't understand the case. We oftentimes see it work both ways, where peer review is not always punitive, meaning it's not just about this peer review quality control panel downgrading departments over inflated scores. It works the other way as well, where a peer review team will say, I don't think you gave yourself enough credit for how influential this program is towards the result. Is that how it worked, Ryan?
Yeah, so, I mean, just like Chris said, we, for each of the result areas that Chris talked about, we had a separate team of individuals from different departments, and they kind of became the expert on that result area, what the scoring matrix looked like. So, and as they did that, they went through every single program, looked at how the department scored that particular program, and if it didn't make sense, like maybe they gave it a 4, but in their minds, you know, it was more of a 3, they could pull that score back down to a 3. I don't know if you have what the 4 through 1 or 0 makes up, but basically, you know, it's a 4 is like it's critical to the achieving this result. A 3 plays a role in. I mean, it kind of goes down the scale there, but like I said, there was a team for every result area that reviewed how those programs were scored.
Here's an example of street lighting I just chose throughout your data, and you can see how that program scored in the basic program attributes, and we can see how the program scored against your results. As you accumulated all of the influence of that particular program, we can see it ended up in a quartile 2 compared to everything else that you do. So that's an indicator of a pretty high degree of alignment overall. All right, question?
Go to one of your, what you call it, resource justification chart that shows the quartiles.
Okay.
Resource alignment, thank you. So this does a great job of sorting, right? So 300 some programs, all sorts of stuff going on, allocating all of that's going on. In practicality, what tends to happen is you go in and you ask about an item, and what you hear about is, well, that's a quartile 1 item. So that's money that we absolutely need to spend. But inside that quartile 1 item might be some money that we don't need to spend. right? Because the dollars are fungible. I can spend them anywhere or I can not spend them at all. How do I deal with that issue?
So in the second part of the presentation, we're just taking action on the data. So the first part was just, let's get the data set prepared. But your point is well made. We see it oftentimes that even a quartile 1 program doesn't mean that it just stays at its budget or increases in perpetuity. Maybe you can make it more efficient, do it in different ways.
In fact, that's exactly the issue that this chart.
Right. Leads you to want to go after, right? You want to go right to those quartile 4s, right? Because that's $7.5 million that maybe we don't need to spend. But inside the 34 million, inside the 28 million, might be even more that you can reallocate to things that might be more important, or not spend at all, or give back to the taxpayers, or whatever might be appropriate. And so as you go through the next phase, I think that's something that would be very helpful, because we do hear that this is a quartile 1, this is a priority whatever, high level, but inside that priority there's money. Is that the most efficient and effective way to have spent those dollars?
Well put. I will do my best in the second section to address, no matter what, quartile 1 or quartile 4, here's how to ask this question nevertheless. I appreciate your point. Is everybody okay with a 5-minute break on, 5 to 10 minute break on section 1? What would you like? 5 minutes? What does this group like? 5. All right, cool. Back in about 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
started here in about 2 minutes, everyone. Similar to last year, with bigger crowd, more speakers. Nope, we moved generally the same place. Like we're 2 blocks away. It was pretty cool, right? I know. I've had several meetings there afterwards that had a good vibe. Yep, totally. Yeah. And there's some architects that work. They have their central headquarters next door. Are you at all familiar with ICLEI? They are all about global climate change and sustainability. They have their headquarters upstairs in that building too. The goal of the first section was, here's what you've done.
Put this data together, and I wanted you to have some sound understanding of program inventory, program costs, how they were scored, department assessment, the review, and how we got to the 4 quartiles.
Leaving to this next section, how we begin to use this information overall. All right. And I'm also hoping that as elected officials especially, that you start to think about how you could, at least, if you wanted to, ask questions about certain services, whether it was at a regular council meeting, or kind of questions that you get asked out in the public. That's why I brought up what we've heard from other elected officials. By the way, are any of you going to the National League of Cities event? Are any of you NLC members?
We're NLC members, yeah.
Okay. There's the DC event coming up, the Congressional Cities Conference. So we'll be presenting there as well, specifically to an elected official audience. And it's different. I mean, a lot of my work is obviously with staff, trying to help staff use the data to get good recommendations out on the table, but it's a different level of training to work with elected officials and try to help you ask questions about programs. Ask, are we the only ones who provide this program? If you've ever wondered that about something you do, that's degree of reliance. And you have at least a first approximation of whether or not there might be somebody else who you could partner with. in the community overall? Does this program pay for itself? Those are the kind of things that I'm hoping you're starting to understand already. You can ask that question because the data is there from the work that the departments have gone through. All right. So the overall goal of PBB implementation is not just to get to that 4 quartiles and call it good. The hope is that you use this information to make positive changes overall. And I want to walk you through the framework for doing that, because as you graduate from one year to this, in the budget exercise itself, as you're entertaining new recommendations, or several of you have asked about what's in the base budget for your current spend on programs, how do you help ask questions of departments to see what their recommendation is all about? So we designed the blueprint for taking action, or the blueprint to fund the future. And over on the right-hand side, the point is priority-based budgeting is a tool designed to meet a specific end goal. If I rewind the tape to when I was in local government, what was always interesting is that sometimes the focus is solely on how do we balance the current budget, which is a very important question. How do you balance the current budget? But the other sometimes unaddressed question is, even with a balanced budget, what are we not addressing? What are the new needs that this community actually has in front of it that sometimes you can't go after because you feel like you simply don't have the resources to do that? So whether we define new needs as actual new programs that you want to start, Gary, this is back to your strategic plan, I bet you're going to come up with a ton of new programs that you don't offer today. Or if you're thinking about current programs that you provide that you sure wish you were doing more of, that they are influential, but they're lacking capacity. You need more resources for those particular programs overall. PBB the intent is to make sure, how do you know what your options are to resource those needs, let alone the current programs that you're providing. We do have some communities down in this area where they say, we don't have any new needs. It's hard enough just to maintain what we're doing. And everything that we're providing right now is absolutely critical. And we do have only 2 communities we've ever worked with who said not only are our current needs all completely met, but our goal is to actually figure out a way to just not need as much overall. But for those particular communities, they are still conflicted with the idea that there are additional things they could be doing overall. Kind of fascinating. So PBB is a tool meant to address this question, how are we going to fund those? And its portrayal is very simple. You have at least two primary levers to pull using your priority-based budgeting data. The top one is you can spend what you already have differently, which our way of saying that is you can reallocate current resources, spend them in a different way. So we can work on the expense side of the equation, or we can work on the revenue side of the equation, which is the bottom one. We can generate more resources into the organization. Both of those can help you to figure out how to fund the new needs that are in front of you overall. And when it comes to what you can actually do, or what we try to point you to do, the opportunities that become more interesting to look at with your priority-based budgeting information, if we focus on this top area on the expense side, freeing up and reallocating resources, there are many things that you could do. One is maybe you could source a program differently than you source it today. And this could look like outsourcing. This could look like insourcing. So we leave it kind of as sourcing in general. But if there's a different way to leverage a partner provider that overall reduces the burden on you as a city, that could be one way that you free up resources to direct at these new needs. So this is what we're going to try to work on in PBB data. Second is we can look at efficiencies. We can do a program more efficiently, spend less on it, require less resources, use those resources to fund new needs. Councilmember, this is back to your point overall. Whether you're a quartile 1 program or a quartile 4 program, any program is up for a discussion of program efficiency, doing it with less resources overall. Always a fair question to ask. And then finally, on the for this presentation at least, on the freeing up and reallocating resources, we can look at specific service levels of programs that you might find it's okay to simply do less of a particular service. So where would we point you to for those services overall? They tend to be, in our simplification, a program that has less to do with achieving your criteria. That's a logical place to start. But that's not to say that a highly aligned program, you might be over-provided. So you can still ask the same question for a quartile 1 or a quartile 4. It's just helpful context. This is additional information, was our hope. On the revenue side, and I'm going to walk through all of these in more detail for the rest of this section too, we could look at, are there programs that you provide where, remember we talked about, we allocated cost to every program, but we also allocated revenue. So you might have programs where you charge a fee, but the revenues coming in are less than what it costs you to provide it. So can we look at basic cost recovery? And it doesn't mean that every program should achieve 100% cost recovery. That's a policy discussion. You might intentionally subsidize a program for your own reasons. You might have state limitations on the revenue that you can charge, or federal limitations, or it might be a competitiveness issue where you're trying to keep rates low overall. But it's always an option. You look at cost recovery of your program, so we'll look at how to find those overall. On the generate new revenue side, you can talk about insourcing. So we spend a lot of time in that section as well. We find a lot of communities, often when the sourcing question comes up, almost all of the focus is on, can we find somebody else to take this program off of our plates, which is a great question to ask on the expense side. But on the revenue side, what if Roswell is positioned well to actually insource or provide a program regionally to other potential service providers and actually generate revenue from that program overall? So those tend to be interesting ideas. And then finally, at some point, you might discuss the taxation question or the rate increase discussion. We only put it here as last resort on the revenue side, simply because it's the area that's hardest to control. All of the other areas, we can analyze our own programs, we can make our recommendations. When it comes to asking the citizens to approve more resources coming into the organization, we can definitely do that, and we've had communities be successful in showing how they're using their resources in PBB, but it's out of our hands a little bit. So the idea is, can we look under every other rock first before we turn to the taxation discussion? But by all means, if you need more resources, use your PBB data to focus on that question overall. So I want to walk us through each of these sections, thinking about your programs, but also bringing in other stories from implementers who have gone through this and worked through the blueprint. And the key here, whereas in section 1 of the presentation, I wanted you to understand you identified programs, how many?
344.
344, Gary got it twice again. All right, you allocated costs, you scored programs relative to results, we understand program influence on results, we understand prioritization. For this second section, I want you to think about this, because it is a twist. Every program has a future. The future of a program that you provide right now might be that you want to grow it, or the department wants to recommend to you that the community would be better served if we grew this program overall. You might have a program where its future is you might want to decrease funding for that particular program. Maybe it's outdated, maybe you're over-providing to that program. And certainly it's okay to have a program where the recommendation is status quo, but at least that's a choice. Bless you. Status quo is an option, but it's at least a decision. So as we work through the blueprint, every program has a future. And the overall idea for the blueprint is to position your budget discussions, but not only at budget time, anytime. Whenever you have something new that you wish to fund, it's on the new needs side. You need more money to do it. Where are we going to get the resources to do it? It's a trade-off. And we want to position every program you have in that context for the trade-off discussions overall, where the new needs kind of grayed out in the background of the blueprint. These are where you're trying to increase spending to grow a current program or to launch a program that you've never started before that is a high priority. Where are you going to get the resources to fund those new needs? We can reallocate what we already have. We can decrease spending in certain programs, or we can bring in more revenue on the revenue side. And that's the overall hope. In its simplicity, this is the idea of the blueprint. Let's walk through some specific examples. And please, along the way, for any of these discussions, if you've got a burning question, jump right in. But let's talk first. We'll work our way through the sections on the revenue first. And the reason is because oftentimes these are easier discussions to have immediately. Cost recovery, for example, grant reimbursements, than working on the expense side of things. So when we talk about the fees and charges discussion, this won't be new to you, but I just wanted to show you, here's an example. This is one of our first implementations in the city of Boulder, and it was a city-run yoga program overall in the city. And first and foremost, you can see they came up with a program inventory, they did program costs, they scored the program, and the program ended up in quartile 4. You can see that in the top right area right over here. So first thought, this is back to council members, the quartile designations, what do they actually mean, and how do you raise questions around these? So quartile 4, one of the elected officials in the city of Boulder was not thrilled that yoga was a quartile 4 program because from her perspective, citizens really loved it. There was great turnout for the program. She understood in her particular geography, people were very supportive of the program overall. So there must be something flawed with the logic of the process, and maybe there could have been. That's always a good question to ask. Are we missing a result? Is there something in the evaluation criteria that led this program to be scored in quartile 4? Did we score it wrong? From department assessment to peer review, you can always ask the question and find out what you think about the scores. So we did that. I know it's kind of bleached out, hard to read from where you are, but I'll just, these are the basic program attributes, and those are the results. So as they looked at yoga, is it mandated by the federal government? No. Is it mandated by the state government? No. Is it in their charter or incorporation documents? It wasn't. So it scored 0 for mandate. As you go down the other areas, change in demand was pretty stable. Population served is pretty small compared to the Boulder population. If anything, it had some cost recovery overall. Reliance was low. As we looked at the result areas, is yoga making the community safer? Is providing yoga increasing the safety of the city of Boulder? It did not score highly there. You got something for healthy community overall, healthy and socially thriving in Boulder. Transportation, 0. Environmentally sustainable, 0. So for these reasons, this is back to council members' question on the scoring. For those reasons, this is how it ended up in quartile 4. Does that make sense? It scored low in all of those scoring categories overall. But the one, the one particular council member was still not pleased. People loved this program. Well, any guesses why residents loved the yoga program?
Yeah, it costs less than the program at those places.
Yeah, there you go. So it costs so much less than the other places that it was actually free. Like 100% less. So you're right on target. They asked the question, and that's why people loved it. So you got a quartile 4 program, it's offered for free. First question that they asked was, can we actually look at the client, can we talk with the users of the program? Maybe Boulder was providing it to a lesser income portion of their society. Maybe they were intentionally subsidizing it, and that was the issue. Good question to ask and do that due diligence. That was not the case. Here in the city of Boulder. These are regular folks who could have been using the other facilities but came to the city of Boulder to use it for free. Next question they asked, so we're on this topic of cost recovery and fees. They said if we at least charged what some of the other studios are charging, would the residents continue to use it? And what do you think they said? No, absolutely not. They said the other studios are far better, higher quality studios in the city of Boulder. We love your studio because it's free of charge, but we would never stay here if we had to pay what we pay at Core Power. But what does that mean? So the issue that City of Boulder had to grapple with was, in some respects, by subsidizing a program completely so that it's free, they were negatively impacting their economic vitality result, right? Because they have other potential service providers in their community. These aren't necessarily users who depend on a lower income program like that. So they at least asked the question, can we generate the fees overall? The users said no. So does that mean Boulder stays in the business? No, they actually look for a partnership overall. But that's how you work your way through that discussion. To your point, one council member said, I think at one point in the 1970s, City of Boulder did start a yoga program because it was a new need. It was on the new need side of the blueprint, and citizens really demanded it, and there was no other option. So reliance was going to be very high, and Boulder said, we're going to do it. It will add to our quality of life overall in the city, and they launched this program. So the relevance was probably high when they got into it in the first place, But you fast forward today, they said we have more yoga studios than Starbucks in the city, and they proved it. They showed like the per capita yoga versus Starbucks availability, and they were totally correct. But that's the way to work through the blueprint, to have that particular discussion. So even on the cost recovery side, you might think this is a perfect program where we should raise the fees because it's low priority. It has less to do with our results, meaning it's not necessarily the wisest thing to do to take all of the citizens' general government resources and force allocate them to a program that has less to do with accomplishing results when the users could pay for it. But when they asked the users, would you be willing to pay for it, and they said no, you're confronted as an elected official, well, should we still use the general government resources of our citizenry to fund this program that only serves a handful? Boulder said no. Boulder said that the best thing to do is look for a partnership overall. That's a tough policy discussion to have, but that's the way to march through how to use the framework overall. Different conversation. This is Toledo, Ohio. Gary was out at our PBB event to see Councilmember Sandy Spang, who, if you have not met Sandy, she's a good colleague to have from an elected official standpoint, someone who's been through priority-based budgeting for years now and is seeing it work. So this is residential permits, permit program, and just like you've seen, they calculated their costs. It was $291,000 overall for the program, and at the same time they looked at, that was a line out the door. This is the demand for that program. Because their program is small, they can't meet the demand in a timely manner. So again, on the left-hand side of things is a program where they have new needs. So someone simply asked the question, well, is the program paying for itself? Can we just, is there something wrong with the rates where we can't generate enough revenue to hire the staff to serve the demand overall? So left-hand side of the equation over here, here's the permit program, $291,000. Here is the general government revenue, the subsidized element of it is $0. Here's the fees coming in for that program, $652,000. So that's odd, right? The program is more than paying for itself. You go back here, so the question was, why don't they use some of this increment of revenue to hire more, whatever they have over here, clerk specialist 2s or clerk specialist 1s to help lower the demand? And the reason is, if you look over here on commercial inspections, here's the total cost, $477,000. Here's the subsidized element, $473,000. And here are the fees coming in for that program, $4,000. The reason is because they were using the profit from this program to subsidize this program over here. Sandy's point is, we wouldn't have known it if we didn't have the program inventory data and have the cost recovery discussion in the first place. It doesn't say that it's right or wrong. In fact, most of the time when I make this particular presentation, somebody will say, but that's illegal in our state. You can't make a profit on one program or another. And it depends on how you actually calculate the costs. If you lump these two programs together, they're not necessarily making a profit overall for both programs. But they've broken it out that way. So cost recovery discussion. This is Branson, Missouri on cost recovery. If you live in Branson and you have an issue with a tree in your yard on your property, you can call City Hall to come out and actually do tree removal. They'll work on your tree, they'll take your tree out. Pretty cool, right? And as they looked at their total cost for that program, first off, the question was, they calculated it at $3,900. So a couple departments were curious, is that even truly the cost of providing the program? I bet it's a lot more. So this is a discussion of, did they allocate their time correctly? So good observation on that end. But the second point, they saw government subsidized portion of the cost, program revenue free. So the recommendation from the department was, can we at least have residents pay for this program? It's only offered to those who call in who have some specific needs for their trees. And while they grappled with the policy issue in that question, what it really migrated to, so they said, first off, can we say, let's cover the cost of that program, at least charge a fee commensurate with what it costs us to provide it. The other side of the coin, which they got to where I live, in the city of Denver, if I tried to call for tree removal, the cost to the city is $0, and the reason is because nobody provides that program. Government has decided they're not in that business overall. So that's my father-in-law. When I have a tree problem, that's who I call to actually source that program overall. But this is the spirit of cost recovery. So I told you we've worked with 200 communities overall. I want you to think about this. Anybody know what the total budget is for the city of Roswell? Total expenditure budget. Rough numbers. Rough? Let's call it 160 million, just for the sake of discussion. Can anybody calculate what 16%, or call it 15% of 160 million is? 24 million? Yep. Add a little bit for 16%, the number I'm about to get you to here. Across every community we've worked in, when it comes to this cost recovery discussion, the gap between the fees that we actually charge and the costs of providing those programs represents about 16% of their budget. And it means that it's a real opportunity. Now will you go out and now raise $24 million just by raising all of your fees to 100%? Probably not. And the reasons are, maybe it's unpalatable to raise fees for certain programs that you provide. Maybe there are state limitations on the revenues that you can charge. Maybe you want to remain competitive with your neighbors, so you keep rates at a certain level for some of those programs with fees for service overall. But let's just start with, for the sake of the discussion, if you're like any of our, all of the other organizations that we've worked with, if you had $24 million on the table, can you go after $2 million of that? That'd be very low on the cost recovery scale overall. But the thought is, maybe there are opportunities. And the whole point is, you're going to have to grapple with the philosophy, the political side of cost recovery for every program. But can't we look through every single program that you provide and say, is it appropriate that maybe we just haven't visited fees in a while? So, Harpreet, if I understood correctly, I think there's a discussion end of February on cost recovery that you're going to be working on. Very good. So really cool, and not all PBB related. Cost recovery is something that everybody goes through, but great use of the data in the blueprint is focus on every opportunity you have, like you're going to do on February 25th, to discuss, do we have any opportunities on the cost recovery side of things? That's a conversation that'll be coming back to you. So, and if you think about it in these terms, of course you're going to have to think about it in terms of the appropriateness. That was me. Man. Wow, talk about surreal. So you will be discussing, is it appropriate to raise fees on all of those programs, but also think about it in the bigger picture context of, if we generate the fees, maybe that'll lessen the pressure to do other things from fee perspective or cost recovery reallocation perspective as well. Let's move to the next one, the discussion of sourcing from a revenue perspective. So it's the insourcing discussion overall. One of the first communities who was really tackling this, and this is like a very simple example, city of Englewood, Colorado, insources fleet services from two of their neighbors, the city of Sheridan over there in the town of, or Cherry Hills Village, or the village of Cherry Hills Village, and also to their school district. So in this situation, the batch of services were all around fleet maintenance, and the city of Englewood realized they are really well set up. They're the bigger city among all of these other smaller service providers, where they could actually handle more capacity at their garage, at their service center. So they sell fleet maintenance services to some of the smaller towns in their community and the school district overall, and they make a profit. So this is insourcing to generate revenue where it makes sense. For the other communities, Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village, it's a win for them because the amount of upgrades that they would have to make to build their own garages to support their work is more. It would cost each of them more than it does to simply pay Inglewood. It's a little less convenient, but good thing to weigh. Is it, how troublesome will this be for staff to get their work done overall? But the idea of insourcing as a revenue generator is something that we've seen work out really well. And now Inglewood has worked it on both ends. So while they insource fleet, they actually decided in their situation that it was advantageous as they added up all of the costs. They were well behind in EMS and fire services for all of their stations. So they did their best to add up what it would cost the city of Inglewood to catch up to the level of service they wanted to provide. And just like Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village found it a victory to simply pay the city of Inglewood for fleet, Inglewood made a controversial partnership, but it's worked out really well for their staff as well to merge services with the city of Denver for fire. Extremely dramatic. And I choose it intentionally because you don't have to start with fire. But
It's good because Tony's getting really nervous.
but it doesn't necessarily, Tony would probably attest that it works in some communities and it doesn't for other circumstances. The point is insourcing or outsourcing regionally only when it's a win-win, whether it's fleet, fire, or as we'll get into in other cases, grounds maintenance, things like that overall. So, we have plenty of fire department, fire chiefs in our summits of the past, and in certain areas it makes a lot of sense, in other areas it doesn't, so no intention to offend if none taken. All right, good. Across all of our communities, what we've seen, if you look at the high priority programs that you provide, and this will also go back to one of your points, Councilmember, that you're not looking at lowering levels of service or getting out of the business of providing them. These are high priority here in blue. Quartile 1, quartile 2, they've already demonstrated a high degree of influence on the results you're trying to achieve, but they're still offered by others, which means there could be some sort of partnership at play, whether you are the insourcing regional provider or an outsourcing organization. Across everybody we've ever worked with so far, it represents about 41% of their budget. Meaning there's tons of opportunity. That's the point of the slide. 59% is the rest of your budget. People aren't providing them with their lower priority overall. But even if you just focused on the higher, I think this really goes to your point, just because it's quartile 1 or quartile 2 doesn't mean you couldn't do it more efficiently. These are great services to try to look at as well. So it's taking the context of all the information there. But we're already starting to get into that discussion, the other side of the coin, whether you're the insourcing organization to provide it regionally or the outsourcing organization. It's kind of a function of your perspective. But if it was right for you to consider a program where you leverage another partner, now we're talking about how to work on the expense side of the equation. So I want to draw your attention to Washington County, Wisconsin. This is a county government we worked with. And as you can see here in the bottom, they're bordered by 5 other counties. And they launched an initiative called Counties Without Borders. And their whole goal was, we want to look for these partnership opportunities overall. So Washington County took its program inventory, just like you have, and they shared it. Here are the list of services that we provide with the other neighboring county organizations and said, are there programs where we can partner? It's a very simple approach, and that's how they began. Also worth noting, when they first launched this, they invited all 5 other counties. 2 of them participated. So sometimes not everybody's in the mood to talk about shared services, but you start to work on your victories and then kind of grow it from there. So 2 out of the 5 were actually willing to play ball at first. One of the programs that they really had success with to get going was a merger of county health departments. So Washington County provides health services, and they found that one of their neighboring counties also had a full-fledged county health department, and they didn't merge both counties all together for all services, sheriff and coroner and DA. They only merged health departments. And in doing so, they found obviously a host of redundant positions. They eliminated all the redundant positions, but they didn't get rid of any of the staff. So what you end up with is a host of underutilized staff members who they could reallocate to start new programs that neither one of the jurisdictions was able to start before without a discussion of raising fees or raising taxes. Remember, we're on the expense side of the discussion right now, how to reallocate resources, look for efficiencies. So that's a perfect merger. That's what you would hope for in a merger discussion, is how can two parties come together and in their case, without any layoffs, actually start new programs without any new revenue coming into the equation, is by eliminating redundancy in the equation and reallocating staff members. So I'm hoping that you would think about where could you look for opportunities like that with some of your neighboring organizations or nonprofits we've seen, other entities here within the city of Roswell who you could partner with. We've seen this play out, and I'll show you just a couple other examples. So we have told this story to all of our PBB implementers, and a very unlikely client of ours wanted to try this idea of mapping services. They have implemented PBB just like yours, and they wanted to look at where could other partnerships take place. So this is Moffat County, Colorado. Their population is less than 15,000 overall for the county. That's everybody within the entire county. So, I mean, we were kind of worried in the beginning, like, who are you going to map services with? There's nobody else providing services in Moffat County. But they invited their school district, their community college, the county seat, City of Craig, and their hospital together, hospital service provider. And Moffat County, just like you, they had their program inventory, and they shared their inventory with these other jurisdictions. We're about 30 minutes into the exercise, so the hospital's looking at Moffat County services, the community college is doing the exact same thing. About 30 minutes into the exercise, Moffat County hospital director says, you guys in the county, you offer laundry services? Because he's looking at each of their 344 services, but they had 1,000. And the county administrator is saying, yeah, I mean, we have a pretty substantial laundry facility in our detention center, and then we run a nursing home, which also has a high laundry demand overall. So the hospital director is saying, man, when I think of the county government, I think of road and bridge, and sheriff, and district attorney, and coroner, and the surveyor. I don't think of laundry. It's not like one of your major department areas. This is the power of getting down to those specific individual services overall. So it turns out that the hospital, not knowing that its neighbor right across the street provided laundry services, actually ships its laundry 2.5 hours every week from Craig down to the city of Grand Junction. They have a full-time driver. They spend several $100,000 in their budget every year to handle laundry. The hospital has a huge laundry demand because they just didn't know that anybody else was providing these programs locally. So think about it for yourselves. You've come up with this inventory of 300 and then some programs. What would happen if you started with the public sector, maybe nonprofits in your organization, maybe even discussion with private sector partners overall? That's what we've seen take place, to look for your version of laundry services where it's a win-win. You don't want to do this in a situation where it creates a loss for the other entity. You only do it in the case where, in the laundry's case, the hospital can do much better for their budget to source it locally, not have a full-time driver involved with laundry services, and just go across the street and work on that shared service opportunity. Stories making sense so far? So when we looked at across all of the programs that Moffat County offered and added up the budget spent on programs where they matched up with at least one of the other entities, at least two or at least three, no double counting, 59% of their budget was represented in programs that others were providing, again, in a situation where they thought they would have none. So we find it inspirational, because if Moffat County can find that many opportunities for partnership, perhaps you in a larger populated area could also find partnerships as well. Okay, moving right along. So the next up on freeing up and reallocating resources is just simply looking at, can we do programs more efficiently? Certainly sourcing is an efficiency discussion. What we mean here is, can we still provide the same level of service? Can we still achieve the same outcomes, but perhaps use our resources differently, apply technology in a certain way, and kind of a funny way to get started because it shakes up your thinking a little bit. Did you know that once upon a time, human society lived in an era before we had alarm clocks? Did you know that? That's mind-boggling, but it's true. And this was the manual alarm clock. Is a human resource called the knocker up, who would come and rap on your window. And that was a service that you could provide locally. And that was how we used our scarce resources overall. And then at some point in time, someone invented the alarm clock, and we were able to reallocate our resources because we didn't have to have our staff deployed this way. We could talk the same thing about lamplighters. So before the electrification of modern day streetlights. And the whole point of my storyline here is what knocker up programs will be automated or done differently to provide efficiency and allow you to reallocate your resources sometime in the future. A couple of, well, if we have more time, towards the end, I will tell you about the intergalactic spaceport of Green River, Wyoming. Well, I'll just tell you right now. So this was one of our very first implementations, and it was a Quartile 4 program, and we asked, what is the intergalactic spaceport of Green River, Wyoming? This is one of our organizations. And apparently, sometime in the 60s or 70s, there was news that there was going to be an asteroid that was going to hit planet Venus or one of the other planets. And so a council member at the time said, well, I don't know if there is intelligent life on this planet or not, but if there is, we should announce that Green River is safe haven, and we're going to make a landing strip so they know that they're welcome here. And this actually happened, and they paved it, and you can look it up. And while that was really interesting at the time, you fast forward to today, and they still maintain it. So the question is, maybe not, should we do it more efficiently? Can we reallocate those resources in a different way? Ignacio Valley Road Cone Program. So we were in a San Francisco Bay Area community in California. Another program that ranked pretty low, and the spend on that program was somewhere shy of $100,000, not insignificant, but we were still curious, what's Ignacio Valley Road Cone Program? So apparently, every morning before rush hour, 2 public works staff would drive out to Ignacio Valley Road and block part of the road with cones on one side and block the other side with cones. And after rush hour, they would drive back and collect the cones. And then just before rush hour in the evening, they'd do the same thing. And then after rush hour ended, being paid overtime, they would drive back and collect the cones again. And we were like, what's the scoop on the cones here? And it turned out there was an elected official who lived on this particular stretch of road, and the road was often used as a bypass, and it would create a whole lot of extra traffic. Similar to the Galactic Spaceport, we were curious, when did this start, and when is that elected official going to be termed out of office, potentially? And the realization was that person had long ago passed, but they had continued to apply the practice up until this period of time. So not to make fun, but just to say, are there things, not everybody has an Ignacio Valley Road Cone Program. We use these stories to be illustrative. If we look at the way we do parking today, traffic patrol, parking meter reading, water meter reading. So one of your stories was inspirational to us that we had simply read about, was the way that you have done irrigation in a different way with sensors, being able to understand the saturation levels of your turf and not water the way that other cities do. That's a perfect example of efficiency, cost savings, taking those saved resources and redirecting them to other programs overall. That's what we're looking for here. And finally, in terms of the blueprint, so applying your PBB data to study these other areas, there will be certain programs where you can just do less of them overall. So I want you to imagine, this was my time allocation when I worked in county government around 2006, and we were creating priority-based budgeting to be able to tell our story within county government overall. So this is my time allocation to programs in quartile 1. Here's my time on quartile 2 programs. Here's my time on quartile 3. And here's my time allocation on quartile 4. For quartile 1, I was brought into the county organization to create priority-based budgeting based on my background in budgeting for outcomes. I also had a side responsibility as risk management director. These were my quartile 1 programs overall. Quartile 2 programs, I was creating internal service funds for IT, fleet, and facilities. So these scored pretty well. Quartile 3, here's about 5% of my time or so that is unknown. That's like surfing the internet. Underutilized time, whoops. And here's my quartile 4 programs where, so as a part of my risk management duties, I also was tasked with running an employee safety committee for risk management, which in and of itself is usually an important thing. It's just look at my time allocation. It was almost 20% of my time. Almost every week, I was tasked with running an extensive employee safety committee. Is just the way that we had done it before in our particular county. And for me to devote a fifth of my time to doing it, I completely ran out of things to talk about. I mean, this is like training people on slips, trips, and falls. Don't burn your Christmas tree down. I mean, important things, but not at 20% of my time allocation overall. So selfishly, I used priority-based budgeting as a staff member to tell my boss, if you want to get more out of me as a human resource, I've got some portion of that 20% on the table to reallocate towards other programs that I sure wish I could be influencing. I put this up here because so often when we implement PBB, the first question is, well, unless we cut a program, we're not going to really save anything. Our budget is so personnel driven, unless we lay off people, there's no real cost savings there. But resource reallocation, just like we saw in Washington County Public Health Department merger, where they eliminated positions but spun those people to provide new programs overall, there's real money there. There's real opportunity to reallocate the work that we might do, and especially as it comes to lowering service levels, it's actually, it can be a good recommendation. So in your costing data, again, this is how all of those program costs were derived. Every staff member is allocated to programs. This is from one of our organizations, and we, with the rights to use it, a 4-H department youth staff developer named Megan here. And these are all of her programs, 808, they all have program numbers, 812, 807, and so on. And the time allocation that she logged for each program, when we sorted them by quartile to see where Megan's spending her time in terms of most aligned programs to least, here was Megan's time distribution. Quartile 3 and quartile 4 almost entirely. So back to one of our themes of the morning, one might ask, does this mean the right thing to do is lay off Megan? Because obviously she supports programs that don't matter. No. Another question might be, what if Megan was nearing retirement? Is there an opportunity here where if she leaves, maybe we don't have to fill that position, because right now that position is dedicated to programs that have less alignment? Could we afford to do with less of that program overall? Or can we reclassify the position to get into something that is more aligned with results? These are the opportunities that present themselves from an HR perspective overall. The issue with this particular individual, while she was at work completely dedicated to quartile 3 and quartile 4 programs in the community, she was 40 under 40 designation from their local business journal, which meant that she was an all-star contributor in the rest of her involvement in that community. It's just at work, they were using Megan for all the wrong things. Back in my original slide, I'd heard an environmental science person define the term pollution as a valuable resource in the wrong place. So, I mean, if you think about air pollution or if you think about water pollution, it's not that the things that make the water polluted are bad, they're just bad in water. But you want those resources to do other things for you in the world, you just don't want to drink them. And that's the idea overall with our human resources at times when we talk about lowering service levels or resource reallocation. Where do we have opportunities where our current staff members are simply devoted to programs that have less influence? And what can we do over time to set goals to say we want to try to help free up people, if it's possible, from their devotion to programs that have less alignment overall on results. So that's the summary of how organizations, Gary, I wanted to bring this back to make sure that I'm giving you a taste of how other communities are trying to apply their priority-based budgeting data as you guys get into that. And the other hope was, as you look at the blueprint, again, as you're looking for, you had mentioned you want to question current spending or how can we do things differently. Maybe a different angle on it might be, what is the fate of this program? If we have a base budget for a program, can we do it in a different way to free up resources? Can we generate new revenue with that program? Is its future to grow it, actually? We might be complaining about the base program spending because it's not enough to do what you really want it to do. Or is the program something that we could consider doing differently? Or is it status quo? Remember, that could be an acceptable future, but at least you've asked the question and you can move on from it overall. Does that help you with some of what you're hoping to learn? Okay.
So you gave us, one of the scoring mechanisms was 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, with 4 being, I believe it was a federal or state mandate.
Oh, the degree of mandate.
Degree of mandate?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, you said 3 was
Charter.
2 was something that was in our ordinances.
Yep.
So one of the things that I think gets embedded into these budgets are things that are in the score 2 and 3.
Score 2 and 3 in that mandate category?
That we have some control over.
Yeah.
Right? Perhaps we can change, but we don't even know they're there.
Yeah.
Because there's 344 programs and hundreds of things inside those 344 programs. So it might be interesting as an exercise to see everything that on its mandate scored a 3 or a 2. And evaluate whether whatever that item is in our ordinance or in our charter, is that something we still think is relevant, right? I mean, do we actually have the guys banging on windows? I mean, because we have an ordinance that says you have to have them. So that would be interesting, Gary, as a way to get down to that question that we talked about some time ago. Just, resort them.
I guess to expand on that, in your experience, what level of detail do elected officials typically get involved based on Councilmember Tiser's comments?
It's definitely varied. Yeah. In our experience, we have some elected officials who completely recognize they're trying to provide policy from administration, which is what you always try to do, but sometimes it's not as easy as it sounds. In terms of Councilmember's question on degree of mandate and seeing that list of programs, so long as it's in the realm of a policy-oriented discussion to say, you might be looking at changing your own policy. Maybe you find out the reason that we're doing it is, like you said, with the alarm clock program, we require ourselves to do it. I mean, just have not thought of that in a long time. And the clerk is here. I mean, oftentimes we would hear the story of a code review, of course, or a clerk being tasked with, can you go back through and look at every single ordinance that we have and tell us about it? And that's one way to start, but you might not finish for the next decade. So instead, dividing and conquering your work to just look at the programs that scored 2 and question those. What ordinance are we talking about? Can we question it? That's a good way to start. Okay, sounds good. So very similar to how Harpreet brought up the cost recovery discussion. So staff is going to come back to you because they've done the analysis on which programs are opportunity areas. Perhaps they even have recommendations. Then it becomes a policy discussion to say, should you or shouldn't you increase the rates? How do you feel about that? This would be along those lines. What are programs where it's up to the elected body to question whether or not you want to keep an ordinance on the program?
Thank you.
All right, you've hit our next break. So we'll take another 5 minutes before we hit the last section. This was taking action on the data.
and we have a final section of where this goes in the future as well. That was pretty neat.
probably the deepest. And I appreciate the questions right before the break, where you're wondering how other council members interact with this, to questions like yours. And we have seen it different ways. So I was pulling up a couple slides. We have different communities who have approached it really effectively in different ways. Boise, Idaho launched what they called program reviews. And all they're doing is they're following the blueprint. And they're saying, okay, we're going to bring in front of council, first we're going to start with revenue, the same order that I just went through here. What are those programs where on the fees and charges side of things, the fee coming in, the revenues coming in are short of the total cost, just like Harpreet is going to bring on February 25th. And can we talk about those? You might not be able to answer all the questions during that meeting. So Boise says, can we at least get a temperature from council on which ones they want to study a little bit further and which ones they don't want to study any further, so they could differentiate the list and then have staff come back with recommendations. But it's all focused on fees and charges on the revenue side first. And then the next discussion could be around, what opportunities have departments come up with where we might be really well positioned to in-source programs. I'll tell you, we did this in Clear Creek County, and another small county organization, but they invited all their local nonprofits. And that was really fascinating. Number one, they said they did not even know all the nonprofits who were operating within the county as they started off overall. Would any of you say you know all the nonprofits who are operating? Yeah, it's crazy. We were in Nassau County, New York last week, and they believe that within the county government itself, there are over 600 individual local government units, not operating as Nassau County, but little water districts, fire districts, special districts, localities, and they believe that they don't know who they all are, let alone what they do. So when it comes to insourcing or outsourcing, the first step was, can we at least assemble them together and understand who's doing what? But anyway, so Boise's going through these program reviews, and it's been really effective. To your point, Councilman, we've had some elected officials who want to get into the data and do it themselves. They want access to the tools. And I was talking to Gary Ryan, so I'm not like about to put my foot in my mouth, hopefully. But this is something that is open to, we can create a level of access for you to get into the data, to mine your own. If you wanted to ask, what are all the programs that scored 2 in mandate? And I want to see a list of those. And then I want to subset, I want to filter down on not only those that scored 2 in mandate, but those that don't already pay for themselves. So what are the ones that are subsidized by less than 100%, or subsidized by some percentage of general government revenue. And then I want to subset even lower on, let's start with the quartile 3s or the quartile 1s. But you can go through it in that kind of order. But what I think I heard you say at the break was, maybe you're less interested in getting in and mining through all the tools, but simply asking Ryan and Harpreet, can you produce for me a list of the programs that meet these criteria? Because you just asked the filtering question, and whether you had to do it in the tools or you asked staff for it, that's the idea of a program review, is get the list and talk about it. All right. Last section I wanted to get into is more of a look towards the future, and again, bringing some story elements from other communities we've worked with. When we first started our work, we didn't know that there would be anything more than level 1. Level 1 was, can we take your budget, allocate it to programs, align programs with results, and then you're done. Now you know how much you spend on your results. Isn't that all that you would want to do? But it took continuous work with our clients who said, well, once we get to level 1 and we know where the money is going, why wouldn't we want to move to a next level, which is reallocating resources or doing something different? We thought that was pretty novel. It's cool. So that was level 2. Level 3 asked the question, well, what's the finish line? How much should you reallocate? What is the mark of success? And we had to answer with, well, I guess it depends on how much you're trying to reallocate. There will come a limit at some point, but the list of new needs might be greater than what you have the resources to fund. So what do you do then? And then that gets us to level 4, which is how to use the other partners in your community. So I want to walk you through it because it might give you a sense for your vision long-term. I know you have the strategic planning exercise coming up, but it's nice to see the big picture. So level one, when we first started this work, the whole idea was Roswell, just like Boise here, most communities have at least a starting place for what they're trying to accomplish. And whether it's through your strategic plan, your mission, your vision, your value statements, most communities will at least have this starting point. What are we trying to go after? And then we work with them to try to refine, what do you mean by safe community or a healthy community or a strong local economy? And we'd help them create these result definitions overall. And then the idea was, can we connect the budget to that? And that's what we were showing early on with Boise, was how do we show spending towards results? Can we tally that? Can we put it in the budget book? And that is a proxy for the programs that are really contributing to a safer society that you can actually talk about. You've already accomplished this, and this is one of the tools that I think you would be interested in having access to, is being able to look at each of those result areas like we were demonstrating live and drilling into seeing what are the programs that have the greatest degree of influence on economic development, putting aside any discussion of spending differently or reallocating resources, but just starting with, what do we do that influences a safe and secure community? Here are the programs, here's how much we're investing in a safe community overall, and that is a win in priority-based budgeting. It's important to be able to have mastery over that data, so when citizens ask you, what are you doing for the economy, or you're at a chamber event, what are you doing for us here locally, that you can at least be able to show, here are the programs that we're providing that are trying to make this economy better. By these definitions, here's what we're doing as a city overall. But then, again, that question was, well, this is fine, but with the data that we've just created, can't we go further with it? And this is what level 2 was all about, was how do you change your spending and reallocate resources? So this is Branson, Missouri, just like you. They went through the steps of PBB, they defined result areas, came up with specific result definitions, did a program inventory, put a cost on those programs, scored them. They could see how much they're spending towards their results across the budget, and they could prioritize their spending. But the level 2 work that they did was, once they got to this point of understanding where their resources were going from a quartile perspective, over time they've been able to start to move resources ever so slightly. And what you're seeing is here in quartile 4, the spending actually went up for 1 year in quartile 4. That's okay. Sometimes you can't avoid it. Sometimes there will be a new mandated program that is imposed upon you by the state or by the federal government that doesn't align well with your results, and you have to increase spending. So being able to grow a program here, the whole idea is you hope that you don't have to do a lot of that, growing programs that have less to do with accomplishing your results overall. So this is Branson. They began to, ever so slightly, find ways and good recommendations to source differently, find efficiencies, lower service levels on programs that, to them, scored low in the process, that were rational to do less of. So they're pulling dollars away. This 2015, 16, 17, 18, all in quartile 4. Here's quartile 3, and you can see a very similar behavior. Over time, they have done their best to try to mine resources away. They'll also tell you that sometimes for the programs that they've grown in lower priority areas, they've grown them, but at the same time they've brought program revenue with them. That's a really good recommendation. If you're going to grow a service that has less impact on your results overall, can we at least try to make sure that it's paying for itself for those who are benefiting from it? So that's fine too. So you can see quartile 3 growth, and then the same idea, they've begun to mine some of those resources away. In neither case, in Branson's world, had they brought quartile 3 to 0 or quartile 4 to 0. We've never worked with an organization who has set that as an objective or wanted to achieve that. You will still find quartile 4 programs that there's no way around it. You're going to do it. An example that we saw early on in our work, oftentimes, even in quartile 4, was meter reading. for water utilities. So if you think about it, if you go through, why did it score quartile 4 to begin with? Does meter reading really have a tremendous impact on a safe community? Not necessarily. It scores low in transportation. It scores low in environmental sustainability, although sometimes you could have an approach to meter reading that is going to score somewhat there. But one of our clients said if a philanthropist locally gave you $100 million to make Roswell awesome, you would not go, I know what I'm going to do with that money. I'm going to hire a bunch of meter readers. That's what this community loves. That's the difference between quartile 1 and quartile 4. But are they going to stop doing meter reading? No. Their whole hope is they just want to spend the least amount of money on that program that they have to do and use their resources to fund things that are more clearly aligned with results. That's the way to think about it. In Brandon's case, quartile 2, quartile 1, you can see ever so slightly what they've been able to mine out of lower priority spending areas. They're trying to push towards program growth in quartile 2 and quartile 1. But nothing terribly dramatic, but it's just starting. It's like Megan Bueller's quartile 3 and quartile 4. You start to get good at it, and then you see PBB for what it is. It's a very simple framework for bringing these conversations up, for different things that you could do to increase funding in one area, decrease in another area, or bring revenue in according to the blueprint. And so here in level 2, I just wanted to show you this is your the current data that we have in the tools. Your 2 years of 2018, 2019 quartile arrays, and it's like Branson. You're showing. It's not as simple as it's a 100% rule to always cut quartile 4, like we just said for meter reading. But you start to see a trend in your overall approach to resource allocation that leads us to believe it's positive. And this is what you can see. Pulling back on quartile 4, quartile 3, increasing there in quartile 1 by something somewhat dramatic there. And then the homework that you have is to ask a deeper question. Like, this looks good, but what did we actually do to change the services? What were the recommendations? How does it fall in line with the blueprint or not overall? So level 2, you start to get good at resource reallocation and making those recommendations. And it begs the question, what is the finish line? Where do you draw the line? And so, Gary, you had a chance to see Kalamazoo, Michigan speak at our conference. Their mayor came with their city manager to talk about what they're working on. And it's also important that PBB is not the end-all, be-all of their story, but they're trying to figure out, they have some serious ambition around ending poverty in their community. They don't want another generation of their population born into poverty. So they want to figure out how to solve that. And that sounds really great and ambitious. They will admit that they don't know what those programs are that end poverty. No one does, but they want to pour resources in that direction. That's what they're hoping to accomplish. And so between PBB and talk about insourcing, we're trying to find some local philanthropists with tremendous resources to contribute towards the city. They want to free up as much as they possibly can to allocate towards programs in this direction. Now, Jim Ritzma, their city manager, he had something profound to say. He says he's been in local government for all of his career. He's been a city manager in Kalamazoo, and before that, it was another Michigan city. 20 years submitting budgets to his council is going to be my point here. And he said what has happened in his lifetime is that in the worst of years, you're submitting a budget that's like, here's the best I can do to minimize the pain and impact on our citizens. Most of the time, the budget is more or less flat, but even in a great year, it might be a one-time bump of 3% or something that quickly gets absorbed in all of the programs that need personnel increases or infrastructure updates. So even in a good year, that amount of money doesn't go a long way. And he said the impact that it had on him as a city manager with his councils is that they stopped talking about really big goals like ending generational poverty because it's frustrating to talk about those goals, because it's unrealistic to talk about those goals. You never have the amount of money that you really want to be able to go after those sorts of things. And so to bring them up feels like, in his words, you're just setting yourselves up for failure. However, when you start to see a tool like PBB at play, what you begin to realize is maybe there's more money on the table than simply waiting for the economy to bring you new resources overall. And that's this whole idea of freeing up and redirecting the resources that you have already. But Jim also says this, is that there will come a limit where you can only free up so much. I mean, even if you did bring quartile 4 to $0 or quartile 3, first of all, by definition, it's all a relative prioritization. So you will always have quartile 3 or quartile 4. But what Jim has realized is he can use the tool to continue to try to churn up resources to pour towards those really ambitious goals. But at some point, the resources within the city, you're optimized. There's nothing much more that you can do. And where do you turn after that? And that is where we've seen this regional optimization. The way to portray your community's resources as one and trying to align resources across this region is the highest aspirational goal that we've seen so far. So along those lines, Shawnee, Kansas, who I think has some similarities to Roswell, they had gone a couple years in PBB, were starting to get the hang of it, kind of like level 2, and they liked this program mapping concept as well. They hosted an event, they bribed their participants with pancakes, and the idea was, can we bring as many service providers as possible together to map against the programs that we provide? And they found similar stories to what I've shared so far. This was a small neighboring community, Lake Quivira, on the outskirts of Shawnee, and their city manager was realizing on a host of programs, fire and EMS, fleet, grounds maintenance, there were needs that her community had that there was no way that she could ever hope to finance. However, if she could pay the city of Shawnee to provide them regionally and provide them back to Lake Quivira, they're creating a win-win, and that's fantastic. Another participant with the city of Shawnee was the city of Kansas City Parks District. And this is really interesting, it kind of ties into their school district, 232 there. So Shawnee, for some reason, has 2 school districts within its city boundaries. There are 2 superintendents who came. I mean, it's very complicated for a city that's really not that massive overall. And one of the schools has been pressuring the city of Shawnee for some time to build a pool. The reason is because the school district has a competitive swim team, but they have no home pool for their team to swim and compete. So their team's always on the road. Competitive disadvantage. So they are hoping that the city of Shawnee will build a pool and everything will work out. And Shawnee's saying, well, I don't know. I mean, that sounds great, but our resources are stretched pretty thin already. I'm not sure that we can actually do it and generate the revenues to make it cost neutral. Well, here comes Kansas City, Missouri Parks, City of Kansas City Parks, and in the program mapping, what they revealed is that they have quite a lot of pool capacity not too far, very, very nearby to the city of Shawnee that the school district could use as well, and no one had thought to ask them. So these are simple stories. I know it's like laundry services, community pool, but the idea is the more that you drill into these programs, the more of these opportunities continue to come up. I had mentioned Clear Creek County and their nonprofits, and the punchline to that story in terms of leveraging all of their community's resources is you had all these nonprofits who came, and from a number of them, they started this kind of thread of conversation. The nonprofit directors were saying, look, our budgets, you think your budget's tight? Ours is really shoestring, and the demands on them to do as much as they have to deliver for their grant resources, when it comes to things like payroll processing, and you're a small nonprofit, that absorbs a lot of their budget that they sure wish they didn't have to devote to that basic infrastructure need. And so all of a sudden they're looking at the county going, what if we paid you guys to do our payroll? What if we paid you to do our benefits management? What if we paid you to do our treasury management? There was a small city was saying as they grow, they had finally found the demand was high enough for them to have somebody looking after their investments, looking after the books. But rather than this be the fate of every small growing city to hire their own treasury management investment watch person, could they just look towards Clear Creek County or Roswell or somebody locally who's done this before, who's doing it well? And for the insourcing community, the idea is, yeah, they might have to staff up. They might not have the capacity to absorb all the demands from every nonprofit to do payroll processing, but if they can staff up minimally and make it a win-win where they're generating more revenue than what they have to add in costs, it's a victory for their nonprofits, it's a victory for the county. That's what it means to optimize resources across a region overall. This is where I'm heading next. We're doing a statewide program mapping across the state of Colorado, which is actually going to be really fascinating. I'll at least report back on what we learn. Not only from a perspective of optimizing resources across the region, but also basic benchmarking down to a service level, which can sometimes be a holy grail. What does it cost you to do snow removal? Well, the conditions are quite different in southern Colorado than they are in the mountains, but the idea of looking for regional partnerships is taking place. And not to digress, the whole point of the 4 levels is that as you approach your future, and I'm sure in your strategic plan, you're going to get into all these discussions, but this is what the PBB communities are talking about, whether the resource trends that you're working on. We have Tacoma, Washington is really trying to pour a lot more money than what they're able to spend right now on opioid issues and homelessness, and they don't have the new revenue to actually take that on. So how are they going to reallocate what they already have? Some communities are planning for autonomous vehicles and others for inclusive economies. That's actually going to be my speech in DC at NLC. How are we going to be able to fund this future? The whole point of this is that you're already on the way by trying to optimize the resources that you have. And so that is the conclusion of section 3 in your education for today. We went through 101, 201, 301 as a crash course. I can't believe you stayed for 3 hours of PBB. It's actually 2 hours.
One of us apparently
yeah, one preferred the dentist. Thank you. We've still got time. We got capacity. Are there any discussions that you'd like to have or thoughts where I can just help at this point? I just want to leave some time at the end.
Does staff have any questions?
Do you want to show me the dashboard?
Sure. So we're going to look at 2 of them here. And this is the one we've spent more time on, which is the alignment of programs with results. And I think everybody was tracking along with this one. What you're seeing below, depending on the result area that you choose, the darker the color, the more impact that a program has on that result. And if we drill down, and the larger the box, the greater the program cost, the more that you're investing in that program right now. And we can drill into any particular department. Here we are in transportation, and for this particular result, not surprising, sustainable infrastructure. We see their programs, by and large, are influencing the infrastructure result. If we wanted to look into traffic signal maintenance and upgrades, we can go even further and drill into some program detail on its cost. And that's what we were doing earlier for the building inspections to see personnel breakdown, non-personnel. And and a program description, total costs, workload, applied. So this is like a lot of data right away. The other component, however, was when it comes to what staff is working on, they actually have the deeper dive into program inventory, program costing, program scoring. Here is the window for what we call present PBB. It's presenting your priority-based budgeting. We've had some communities actually offer that to their citizens, for citizens to be able to look online and see what programs they're offering. Marathon County, Wisconsin did that, in Rapid City, South Dakota, Longmont, Colorado, and I think a handful of others. In the resource alignment section, this is where I was pulling your multi-year PBB comparison. And while this is nice to see over several years, we could look specifically, I'm going to update my chart stacking here really quickly here to show a quick demonstration. While I do this, my point was going to be, actually I'm going to reset this. If you're interested in diving deeper into the data, we have a way to create a limited user account so that you're not actually going in and changing any cost allocations or scoring programs differently, but at least you can play around with the types of criteria that you were trying to drill into earlier. So I'm going to go back to Roswell. And I was just going to bring up, for example, the type of mandate question that you asked and how we would do it. So here in a single budget focus, here are all programs at once. If I wanted to change my perspective, so I'm looking at it from a quartile first, and then a department, and then the programs themselves, I can change the way that I'm slicing and dicing this data. Not anticipating that you'll remember all this. If we do go down a path where we train you how to use it, there's a training that kind of goes along how do you slice it in different ways. But let's say we did want to understand from the mandate perspective, here I'm able to choose any of my scoring categories. Scores are not only useful for calculating a final quartile, but scores are useful for just isolating a group of programs that meet a certain criteria. So if I wanted to see all the programs that scored a 2 for mandate, meaning they appear to be required by you, I've just really narrowed down the picture overall to a subset of programs. And some of these, interestingly, they're required by you. That doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. Some of them are required by a self-imposed mandate, but they're quartile 1 or quartile 2 or even quartile 3. I think what you would want to start to investigate is, what are these programs? What is the mandate that requires us to do it? What level of service does the mandate require? But now you've just limited your wide universe of all 300 programs down to this shorter subset. I'm kind of curious how many programs there are that meet that criteria. This might take a second. Let's try. 120 programs have a self-imposed mandate. And again, it could be a good one. It could be something that you really support, but at least it's less than 340.
And if you go back to that chart that you had, I think what was interesting was the majority of our self-imposed mandates appeared in quartile 3.
Or no, in quartile 2,
sure.
A big chunk in 3. It's kind of just not in phase.
Interesting. Agreed. And one other thing that I would say kind of goes back to your question about how we've seen other councils. Sometimes it's really helpful for staff if you're able to set the questions that are interesting to you to then drive a discussion, because from staff's perspective, every question could be interesting to go after. If you're really interested in cost recovery, or you're really interested in self-imposed mandates, to be able to subset on these, pinpoint your questions, bring them back to staff, and then departments can say, fantastic, yes, I can report back to you on those. That's what the program review is all about.
So are you able to see what's inside the quartile 3 with a quick? I was afraid of that, Jeff.
But then a lot of them could be paying for themselves too. So direct programs, we look across the board. So this is just saying that here's Parks and Rec. They have a host of programs that meet this criteria. Another good question to ask is, are you okay with it? If it's a self-imposed mandate, less aligned than some of the quartile 1 or quartile 2, but the programs are paying for themselves.
So question, according with your experience, because everything starts with the criteria, good judgment, common sense, and criteria to evaluate every single program. For example, you mentioned at some point the water meter example, which scored very low, but probably one of the criteria was not revenue management. And the important to make sure that every single dollar out there that should be coming to the city comes to the city and on time.
Good point.
So my question is, according to your experience, how many criteria out there and how many criteria you apply depends on the program. This is when it starts maybe getting more complex, or because if you just put safety, transportation, and you mention another one for the water meter, obviously it's going to score very low. But if you ask finance department how important is to get, and public works, how important is to get this dollar right now and the dollar that we need to collect, then I'm sure it's going to score very high. So, elaborate more on these criteria by programs and how flexible it should be. And, it could be a huge world if you put a lot of criteria and analyze program by program with the relevant criteria. What can you tell us about your experience on that?
That's good.
Can I just make one minor point of clarification? That was that your comment regarding that was a typical comment that comes up in other utilities, and it definitely doesn't apply in the city of Roswell because we're all about metering and automated metering.
Right, just use it as an example. I'm not picking on any department. I just use as an example.
You're like, how can somebody think that?
Yeah. So a couple things. One, when it does come to those overarching result areas, you do want to make sure that they reflect why you think that you're in business. On the governance side, I wanted to go there really quickly. So these are the definitions for those internal programs, and they range from attracting and motivating and even developing a high productive workforce. It's on the human resources side of things. Protecting and managing your investments and financial resources. There's a scoring criteria. Human resources, physical assets. There's another one for long-term planning over here, supporting decision-making with accurate data. One question might be, when it comes to a billing and collecting function, is it truly just serving the machinery of government? Is it internal? Is it better scored? And I don't know how Roswell did it. The comment was accurate that I was reflecting on a story of, in general, here's water meter reading. So you take a program like water meter reading, perhaps it scores better, or it's more appropriate to consider as an internal program of government, not citizen-facing. Nevertheless, if you look at it through the lens of like the knocker-up discussions, which is a crowd favorite, then you still have to ask the question, how are we doing that program? Do we have a staff group of 5 driving around and reading meters? Can we at least apply technology, which is what you've done with, it's a modern day program. So applause to your staff. That's not an issue anymore. It's a powerful story to show as illustrative. But also in terms of all the potential criteria you could measure for a program, cost recovery is included. It's already in what you've done. And these major result areas,
are always worthwhile to test and validate. Are they reflecting everything that's important to you? Another way to tackle this is if you ever find a program that's quartile 4, for example, or even quartile 1, and it surprises you, it doesn't seem like it makes sense, then that's always a good time to say, are we missing a scoring criteria? Is there some other reason we're providing this program that we have not captured because it's really important, but it's not showing up that way? So that's what Boulder did with the yoga program, is they were wondering, why would it show up as quartile 4 when we believe it's really important to our citizens? So they asked, are we missing a result that's really relevant towards that result? What they found out was, no, they're not. The citizens love it because they love it free. That's all different ways to try to make sure that this framework is not being invalidated by some missing result. It should all work out if you've got the results correct and the program is defined correctly.
The next question is the criteria are weighted. Let's say you have 5 criteria for one program, and then you say, okay, 50% is safety, 20% is whatever until you.
You have the option, but I was just kind of doing some table talk with Ryan, and all results are weighted equal for you. But you could, so another way that some cities have reached out to their citizens is to ask, are there any result areas that mean more to you? Knowing full well that all of them are meaningful. You're not going to get out of the business of safe and secure community. Do you have a sense for, are certain result areas actually worth more to achieve, and therefore a program that scores highly towards influencing any one of them can actually see a weighted score? So it would be more likely to show up at the top of your ranking list. It is an option. Not every community does it that way. It's an option within the framework, within the tools. You can weight it. I should say results are weighted automatically at a higher level than basic program attributes. And it's about 3 to 1. That's within the system. So the reason we did that was we didn't necessarily want it to be the case that just because a program was mandated, it would launch to the top as if it's your most important program overall. Instead, we wanted it to be okay that you could have a mandated program, but if it achieves none of your results, we actually wanted it to fall in the scoring so you could ask the question, yes, we have to do it, we're mandated to, but we sure wish we didn't have to do it because it doesn't achieve our results. That's why we had the weighting between results and basic program.
Any other questions? Discussion? Jim?
Good.
We're adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Presentation.
Really appreciate it.